Right now, somewhere on the open ocean, there's an engine the size of a 4-story building that hasn't shut off in 3 weeks straight. You switch off your car just to run into a grocery store. This machine hasn't gone quiet once, not for a single second, since it left port. That's not an accident. It's not laziness from the crew. It's a decision made in cold, calculated math, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a cargo ship the same way again. Why would a captain burn thousands of dollars in fuel every single hour instead of simply switching the engine off and saving the money? What actually happens if that engine does stop, alone, in the middle of nowhere? And why, in almost every case, is turning it off more expensive than just letting it run? By the end of this video, you'll know the one rule that decides when a ship's engine is allowed to go quiet, and you'll hear the true story of 1,373 people who came within the width of a single hull from disaster because of exactly this problem. If you like understanding how the world actually works behind the scenes, stick around and hit subscribe while you're at it. To understand that calculation, you first have to go below deck and meet the machine itself. The engine room on a large cargo ship isn't really a room at all. It's an industrial cavern of steel, stacked as tall as a 4-story building, wrapped in metal stairways and walkways that climb in every direction. And right in the middle of it sits the main engine. Forget everything you know about the engine under your car's hood. There are no spark plugs here, no compact pistons tucked under a lid. Each cylinder is wide enough that a grown adult could stand upright inside it, with room to spare. Technicians don't work next to this engine, they climb inside it. Depending on the ship, it might have 6 cylinders, 8, or on the largest vessels, as many as 14. Each piston alone weighs several tons, turning a crankshaft that, by itself, weighs hundreds of tons. The most powerful marine engine ever built weighs over 2,000 tons and produces more than 100,000 horsepower, yet it spins at barely 102 revolutions per minute. Your car idling at a red light turns faster than that, and this giant is one of a kind. There's no spare. If a pump fails, a backup kicks in. If this engine fails, there is no second engine waiting to take over. It's the only force on the entire ship capable of moving tens of thousands of tons of steel and cargo. One common misconception worth clearing up here: this engine doesn't generate the ship's electricity. Smaller auxiliary engines handle that job. The main engine has exactly one purpose: push the ship forward. Here's the part that catches most people off guard. This colossus burns the dirtiest, cheapest fuel that exists, and yet its thermal efficiency crosses 50%. Half of the chemical energy locked inside that fuel actually turns into forward motion. A typical car engine barely hits 30%. In raw numbers, this is arguably the most efficient combustion engine humanity has ever built. But that efficiency comes at a price. This machine has to be fed constantly, and what it eats looks nothing like what goes into your car's fuel tank. To understand why, it helps to rewind a little. The earliest ships ran on wind alone, free, but completely unreliable. Then came the age of steam in the 1800s, and with it, the first unbreakable law of the sea: never let the boiler go cold mid-voyage. Rebuilding steam pressure from nothing could cost hours of brutal, back-breaking labor for the crew shoveling coal. So the boiler stayed lit, day and night, no exceptions. By the 20th century, diesel engines arrived, capable of burning fuels far heavier and cheaper than coal. From the 1960s onward, refineries found a use for their thickest, nastiest leftover, the sludge sitting at the very bottom of the barrel that nobody else wanted. Ship engines learned to digest it, and that sludge became the fuel that powered almost the entire global shipping industry. With it came a closed loop the industry still relies on today, a fuel that needs constant heat just to flow, a heating system that depends entirely on the engine being alive, and a starting system with a strictly limited number of attempts. It was cheap. It also hid a trap that nobody notices until the day someone decides to shut the engine off. The fuel burning inside these giants has almost nothing in common with the diesel in your car. Picture fresh asphalt on a road, thick, black, nearly solid. That's heavy fuel oil, the final, cheapest leftover from the entire oil refining process. At room temperature, it behaves almost exactly like tar. The only way to move it through pipes is to heat it, and not gently. In the storage tank, it's kept around 40 degrees Celsius, just warm enough to crawl through the system. From there, it moves to a settling tank, where it's heated further and cleaned of impurities. Right before it reaches the engine, it's pushed up to roughly 140 degrees. Only then is it liquid and fine enough to burn cleanly and completely. The entire ship is wrapped in miles of piping, each one sleeved in a steam jacket, essentially a giant, floating double boiler running around the clock, 7 days a week. Where does all that steam come from? A boiler that recycles heat straight out of the engine's own exhaust, heat that's essentially free while the ship is underway. There's also a second, backup boiler with its own independent burner, ready to step in whenever the first one can't keep up alone. While the engine is running, this entire cycle costs almost nothing. The engine heats the boiler heats the fuel, and the fuel feeds back into the engine, a closed loop that sustains itself. Now picture switching that engine off in the middle of the ocean and watch exactly what unravels next. Imagine you're the one in command on the bridge. You decide to shut the main engine down to save fuel during a delay. Silence falls over the ship. The heat from the exhaust vanishes instantly, and suddenly the entire job of keeping that fuel warm falls on the backup boiler alone. As long as that boiler keeps working, the fuel stays liquid. But if anything goes wrong, steam pressure starts dropping, the heating system stalls, and the fuel begins thickening inside the pipes, pumps, and filters, slowly, quietly, dangerously. In the worst case, it hardens into something close to a solid plug, jammed exactly where it can do the most damage, sometimes more than 1,000 miles from any port capable of fixing it. Even if it never fully solidifies, waking the whole system back up takes hours. Rebuilding steam pressure step by step, reheating miles of cold piping, purging air out of the lines, not flipping a single switch. It's a slow, delicate process that burns fuel without moving the ship a single mile, just to bring the system back to life. Whatever small savings came from shutting down disappear the moment you try to restart, and every captain knows it. That's exactly why, out on open water, almost nobody dares to try. But reheating the fuel is by far the easy half of the problem. Waking up an engine that weighs thousands of tons is nothing like turning a key. There's no electric starter motor on Earth capable of turning a crankshaft that weighs hundreds of tons. So these giants wake up in a completely different way, with a blast of compressed air at around 30 bar of pressure. A special valve lets that air straight into the cylinder, slamming the piston down with enough force to drag the crankshaft into motion, cylinder after cylinder, in a perfectly timed sequence, until the engine spins fast enough to start burning fuel on its own. But that compressed air, stored in massive steel bottles, isn't unlimited. Maritime classification rules require enough reserve air for at least 12 consecutive starts on reversible engines, and 6 on non-reversible ones. Just a handful of chances to bring a machine this size back to life in the middle of nowhere. And a cold engine, with thick fuel and oil as stiff as chilled grease, doesn't always fire on the first try. Every failed attempt burns through one more shot from that limited reserve. If the crew runs out before the compressors can refill the tanks, the ship goes dead in the water. A helpless island of steel, rocking with the wind and waves, unable to restart its own engine, waiting on a tugboat that might take days to arrive. Even a successful restart leaves permanent damage. Waking a cold engine is a brutal thermal shock to the metal, massive steel and cast iron components, chilled through, suddenly absorb the full heat of combustion in seconds. That shock creates invisible microcracks, speeds up wear, and quietly shortens the life of parts that cost a fortune. Replacing a single-cylinder liner can take several days of specialized labor and run into the tens of thousands of dollars. Every shutdown and restart cycle slowly kills the engine from the inside, and that bill always arrives separately. And then there's a third factor that almost nobody mentions first: time. In shipping, time isn't just money, it's enormous money. A large vessel is chartered by the day, like renting a car, except the car is the size of a small city block. A medium bulk carrier can cost somewhere between $13,000 and $21,000 a day just in charter fees, and the biggest container ships routinely exceed $70,000 daily, with recent peaks pushing past $150,000. Every route is scheduled down to the minute. At the destination port, a crane is already booked, dock workers are already on the clock, and the next cargo is already lined up. Miss the docking window, and the ship sits in queue for hours, sometimes days, burning fuel while unloading nothing. On March 23, 2021, a single 400-meter container ship wedged itself diagonally across the Suez Canal and blocked it for 6 full days. According to Lloyd's List, that jam held up roughly $9.6 billion worth of trade every single day, with close to 185 ships backed up on both sides waiting their turn. Factories ran short on parts, shelves ran short on stock, and containers simply stopped arriving anywhere on schedule. One stranded ship briefly stalled a meaningful slice of global commerce. Ship owners have run these numbers with a calculator in hand more times than you'd think, and the conclusion is almost always the same. Keeping the engine running non-stop is, more often than not, the cheapest and most predictable choice available. So what does it actually cost to keep this heart beating around the clock? Let's run real, current numbers. A bulk carrier cruising at a relaxed 12 knots burns roughly 30 tons of fuel a day. At today's prices, that's somewhere between $13,000 and $16,000 daily, well over $400,000 a month, just for the main engine. A large container ship at full speed can burn up to 225 tons a day, the equivalent of nearly 6,500 full tanks of an ordinary car, every single day without stopping. It sounds absurd until you compare it to what's actually on board: cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars stacked on deck, and a daily charter cost that already dwarfs the fuel bill several times over. Shutting the engine down to save a few tons of fuel while risking all of that accumulated value isn't savings, it's financial recklessness. And there's a mechanical bonus too. An engine running at one constant rhythm wears down far more slowly than one that's constantly started and stopped. Today, every cylinder is essentially its own tiny onboard computer, measuring internal pressure and fine-tuning combustion in real time. But there's one more reason this engine never goes quiet, and it has nothing to do with spreadsheets or profit margins. Picture yourself on the bridge, in the middle of a storm, at night. A ship's rudder only really works when water is rushing hard along the hull. If the engine stops, the ship loses speed and becomes little more than a drifting log at the mercy of the waves. As long as the engine keeps pushing the propeller, the captain can keep the bow pointed straight into the swell, the only position that lets the ship cut through waves without rolling over. But the instant the engine dies, steering dies with it, and the ship starts turning sideways. A large wave hitting a powerless ship broadside can capsize it in seconds. Hold on to that date, March 23rd. It's not the first time it's come up. 2 years before that container ship jammed the Suez Canal, on that exact same date, in 2019, the cruise ship Viking Sky was sailing from Tromsø toward Bergen, off the coast of Norway, straight into a forecasted storm. The violent motion of the waves sloshed the lubricating oil tanks, feeding the generators so hard that the supply cut off. Sensors detected dangerously low oil levels and, as a safety measure, automatically shut down every engine on board at once. A total blackout, at the worst possible moment. 1,373 people were on that ship, with no propulsion and no steering, drifting slowly toward the rocks, while furniture, tables, and dishware slid across the lounges. Many passengers, most of them elderly, genuinely believed the ship could roll over at any moment. The captain sent out a desperate mayday call. According to Norway's official investigation, the ship came within the length of a single hull of running aground on the rocky coastline. It took 39 agonizing minutes to recover enough power to maneuver safely again. Close to 500 people had to be evacuated one by one, hoisted up by cable into rescue helicopters while the ship kept pitching in the waves below the rain. Investigators later described it as an incident with genuine potential to become one of the worst maritime disasters of the modern era. The rest of the passengers and crew eventually reached port under tow for repairs. That was a passenger cruise ship, not a cargo vessel. But that's exactly what makes the lesson so clear. Out on open water, a running engine isn't a luxury or an engineering indulgence. It's quite literally a life insurance policy for every single person on board. So does this heart ever actually rest? It does, but only when three conditions line up at the same time. Land is close, there's time to spare, and the sea is calm enough to be safe. When a ship docks for a long loading or unloading stay, the main engine finally gets switched off, with no rush at all. The smaller auxiliary engines take over, keeping the lights, pumps, and daily life on board running normally. The boiler warms the fuel at a relaxed pace, with zero urgency. Before the ship sails again, the whole system wakes up gradually while the compressors take their time refilling those 12 precious shots of starting air. The most delicate repairs, like replacing a cylinder liner, also happen here, tied up at the dock, never out in the open ocean. Sailors actually have a name for this calm, unhurried shutdown, inherited from the coal-fired era. They call it going cold iron, when the engine is not just switched off, but allowed to cool all the way down until the metal itself is genuinely cold to the touch. And that phrase captures the entire rule this video has been building toward. Out in open water, a ship's heart is never allowed to skip a beat, because a single shutdown at sea lands 3 blows at once. A financial hit from hours of reheating and wasted fuel just to restart. A mechanical hit from thermal shock and a strictly limited number of starting attempts. And a safety hit from total loss of control in exactly the place where no help can reach you in time. That golden rule has held for roughly half a century, and right now it's genuinely being tested. In 2020, new international regulations forced a sudden cut in marine fuel sulfur content from 3.5% down to just 0.5%. The old king of marine fuel, cheap, filthy, and dominant for decades, finally started wobbling on its throne. In 2023, the world's first major container ship, capable of running on methanol, a far cleaner fuel, entered service. Months later, another 16,000 container vessel set sail using the same dual-fuel setup. By late 2024, a third ship underwent what amounted to open-heart surgery at a shipyard. Its original engine swapped out for a methanol-capable one in just 3 months of intense work. By early 2025, roughly 25 ships were already running on methanol engines in active service, with more than 200 additional vessels under construction across shipyards worldwide. Even the owners of these ships openly admit these new engines still demand far more maintenance than the ones they're replacing. Further out, engineers are already testing engines that burn ammonia, a fuel with zero carbon in it, though it comes with serious toxicity concerns for the crew handling it. The fuel is changing, The chemistry is changing completely, but one thing hasn't moved an inch in 60 years. In the middle of the ocean, no engine, old or brand new, can afford to stop beating, not even for a second. Now pull the camera all the way back until you can see the whole planet. More than 80% of everything traded worldwide, by volume, travels by sea. The phone in your hand, the clothes you're wearing, the coffee you drank this morning, almost certainly, at some point, all of it crossed an ocean inside a ship whose engine never slept, cutting through the dark while you were asleep in bed. Big ships don't switch off their heart, for the same reason a human heart never really takes a break either. What looks, from the outside, like pure waste is actually the most efficient combustion engine our species has ever built. It isn't negligence. It isn't an engineer's oversight. It's the most precise science there is, the science of money and survival, working in perfect sync. If this video changed the way you look at something ordinary, hit like and subscribe so we can keep decoding the machines nobody explains properly. Tell me in the comments which everyday machine seems the most illogical to you at first glance. It might just become the next video, because there's something even stranger waiting. Why does a plane never shut off its engines the second it lands? And what are the 90 most expensive seconds in all of commercial aviation?